Hi there, this is David Weiss, your board game concierge here at 401 Games, and this week's Smorgasboard game is Tang Garden, designed by Francesco Testini and Pierluca Zizzi, with beautiful illustrations by Matthew Mizak, graphic design by Daniel Tosco and Gui Gandalf, that's right, Gandalf, and published by Thundergriff Games. The reason I've gone into more detail about the visual credits for the game is that while it's definitely a Euro in terms of design, Tang Garden is definitely Ameritrash as far as components. So maybe we should call it Eurotrash game? Well, let's look in the box and see if Tang Garden is the game for you. In Tang Garden, 2 to 4 players are engineers living sometime during the 7th through 10th centuries, spending the game building a beautiful garden for the emperor. First by laying tiles onto the board, and then adding elements such as trees and pagodas and bridges and tokens representing lotuses and fish and other types of things, and background landscapes which are inserted into these slots along the 4 edges of the board. So by the time the game is over, you will have an Instagram-ready shot to share with your envious friends. Not to mention lots of different victory points that you've earned lots of different ways. Now, the first thing you see when you open the box is this little piece of paper that says, punch boards can be found below the insert, which I really appreciated because I don't know if you were ever in the situation of opening a box and panicking because you couldn't see where all the components were until you thought, oh, maybe I'll look under the insert. But this actually tells you that. So that saves you from having a heart attack. As an extra bonus, you actually informed that by buying this game, you are also contributing to the Forest Garden program. So the publishers are giving some percentage of the proceeds to a reforestation program to replenish the planet's supply of trees, which is not only thematic, but at least a tiny step in the right direction ecologically. It's easy to forget in our love for games that there are resources used to make them, and it's good to know that some people are making efforts to replenish them. As for the components themselves, they are amazing, but make sure that you put aside at least 20 minutes the first time you play to put them together, or less if you've got friends to help you. Not only is there a lot to punch out, there are a lot of holes in things like the coins and the sides of the pagodas that need to be punched out, as well as putting the pagodas and the bridges together. And although they're not that hard to figure out how to do it, I was surprised that there were no instructions as to how to do it properly. I also found the bridges to be quite hard to push together, and you have to be really careful, and they also don't necessarily lie flat on the board, which is a little irritating, but there you go. Now, then you have to spend some time with the amazing little character models because each one is unique and has a uniquely colored base. And again, although it doesn't tell you that, you actually have to go through the character deck, and based not on the color of the icon at the top, but based on the background circle here, you then have to go through each of the character stands and figure out that, this is the hermit, and he goes on this color stand. And sometimes the colors are really close to each other. I'm not convinced I did it completely correctly, but it takes time and you hope for the best. So, on to the game itself. On your turn, you have a simple choice. either take a face-up tile from the top of one of the 4 garden tile stacks and place it on the board, or place a decoration. Everything else is optional and counts as a free action. So there's 4 piles, each with a different type. There's sort of water type, rock type, earth type, sounds like a Pokemon game, and a miscellaneous type, which generally consists of temples and tiles with walls and so on. If you choose to take a tile, you can only take the top one of the pile, and you have to place it so that all the sides match. So the miscellaneous stack has walls, which are useful because walls can be placed against any terrain type. They don't have to match. To place a decoration, you're going to draw from this deck, shuffled, obviously at the beginning of the game. You're going to draw 2 cards, plus 1 for every face-down stack in the game. In other words, the more piles that have had tiles taken from them, the more choice you will have, which is an interesting balancing mechanism, certainly early in the game, because it'll give you more choice. Then you're going to choose one of them, and you're going to place it in front of you and put the corresponding garden element onto the board. So in this case, you place a bridge, and each garden element scores in a different way, not only on its own, but also affects how certain characters score. So, and some of them, like for instance, this bridge does give you a boost on your abilities, which I'll talk about in a sec. So for instance, for trees, you want to try and have as many different types of these in front of you at the end of the game, whereas for lotuses, they're not worth anything on their own, but for each pair of lotuses and flowers, you get 6 points. That's, again, on their own, but some characters will score if they can see them, which I'll talk about as well. So, each player now starts with a character and a matching stand, which puts on the character to show that character is activated, and that will give them sometimes an in-game bonus. Actually, the Emperor is not a starting character, so let's look at the Architect. The Architect gives you 2 points every time you place a pagoda or a bridge while he's active on the card. And at the end of the game, if he's on the board, whichever direction he's looking in, for every one of these icons he can see on the landscapes in the direction he's looking, then he'll score 3 points. So yes, there are line of sight points in this game, which is something you associate normally with war games, but honestly, they're very simple. They're just wherever they are on the board, they have to face one direction, and then where they can look from there to the edge of the board. Now, each player has a board, and I'll just bring it up here to the camera. There are 3 tracks, 1 for each type of terrain. These are called ability tracks, and as your cube moves up, you want to move your cubes up because when all of your cubes pass a certain point on the board, then you are allowed to take another character. And when each of your cubes moves up to these points, you get victory points. So you could get up to 21 victory points. You also have these 4 one-time only lantern actions, which are free, which all essentially let you break the rules of the game in a different way. They turn over, and you can refresh them later in the game. I'll talk about that in a bit. So, unlocking characters gives you more ways to score at the end of the game and lets you place a character on the board so that they can see stuff. Now, if you cover a square on the board that has one of these tiles, there are 2 different types, then if it's a large landscape, which is this, you get to take one of these big landscapes and put them on the board. And all the big landscapes, most of the big landscapes have 2 icons on them. Or you can, if you take one of these, then you can place a small landscape tile. And these are all helpfully color-coded by character, so you don't have to worry about the icons, which are kind of small, and will tell you which characters they benefit. And you always have your choice of 2 to place those on. So, collecting landscape tiles is also useful because you can cash them in later in the game to refresh one of those lantern actions that you used up. So that is very useful as well. So as you can see, there is a lot going on in Tang Garden. So is Tang Garden the game for you? Well, there is a lot going on, so despite its beautiful appearance and relatively simple gameplay, it's not really a gateway game in my opinion. Almost everything you do to add to the garden helps your opponents as well as yourself in ways that aren't always apparent or predictable, certainly especially at the beginning of the game. So the amount of choice you have, even early on, can be overwhelming to new players or those prone to analysis paralysis. I will also say that for a game that puts so much emphasis on visual appeal, the lack of a player aid included with the game is really surprising and kind of a disappointment, although I understand, given sort of the ecological aspect of things, that they were maybe wanting to save on paper, but the fact is I had to go to BGG and print out this really excellent 2 sides of 1 page player aid just to really help early on. Otherwise, you're going to be flipping back and forth in the rules a lot. So just be aware of that. There's also a solo mode where you're trying to build a balanced garden and beat certain thresholds of points. I haven't had time to try that, but it looks good. There's also a BGG user who's created an Otoma variant, so you can play against 1 or more bots. And I'm hoping to try that one too. So overall, I think Tang Garden is a very solid game with interesting choices, and it does a tasteful and respectful job with its theme, at least based on my very limited knowledge set and looking into it on discussions on BGG. But make sure you print out that player aid if you're going to play. So click on the link below to order your copy of Tang Garden. This is David Weiss, your board game concierge here at 401 Games. Thanks for watching. See you next time.